I think that was a very promising start. And now I'm very happy to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Patrik Aspers from St. Gallen University. He started his position there in 2019, and before that he held a chair of sociology in Uppsala University, and before that he held positions at the University of Stockholm, at the Max Planck Institute for Social Sciences in Cologne, and in other places. I don't mention everything. He was a visiting scholar, among others, at Harvard University, at Columbia University, or also at Sciences Po, London College of Fashion. And again, it's not the exhaustive list, it's just a few highlights. And Patrik has a close, or has had a close relationship also to German research institutions. So he was visiting scientists at the Advanced Study Center at the University of Bielefeld, for instance, and also at the University of Leipzig. And he worked for several years at this Max Planck Research Institute in Cologne. The research areas from Patrik are qualitative methods, in particular ethnography, the sociology of markets, the fashion industry. So Patrik is the expert with regards to fashion. We talked about fashion a little bit in the first session. Now we have the expert here. He also worked on uncertainty, the sociology of knowledge, and of course all the different possible overlaps of these topics. So uncertainty in markets or uncertainty in valuation and so on. And he has published widely on these topics. So again, only a few highlights. So the monographs, Markets in Fashion, a phenomenological approach, published in 2012 with Routledge, is one example. Second example, Orderly Fashion, a sociology of markets, published in 2016 with Princeton University. And also a very nice collected volume that I can really recommend, co-edited together with Jens Beckert in 2011, The Worth of Goods, Valuation and Pricing in Markets. So you already recognize from the titles of these publications that Patrik is really at the heart or at the core of our topic here. Patrik, of course, also has published in journals, in the most reputable journals in our field, Annual Review of Sociology, Organization Studies, Qualitative Sociology, American Journal of Economics and Sociology, Current Sociology, and so on and so forth. Moreover, Patrik has also published in geographical journals. So there are articles in the Journal of Economic Geography, or more recently, Geographiska Annala Series B in Human Geography. So also a spatial view on these topics is, even though it's not natural for sociologists, but it's quite remarkable in Patrik's work. So I'm really happy to have you here in Erkner. It was nice that you could make it. And I cannot imagine someone better suited to open up the field that we will study the next 3 days. So Patrik, a warm welcome to you.
Thanks, Oliver. That was a great introduction. I think you mentioned more things than I've done somehow, so I fear the expectations are too large in the crowd, but I mean, I'm not an expert. That's a good thing being a sociologist. You know nothing. You know a little bit of everything, but you know nothing in essence, really. But still, I will try to do my best to start a conversation. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here. So thanks again, Oliver, for the invitation. When I was a kid, I used to hang around in these areas in Sweden where I was brought up, taking pictures of old industrial sites. So I'm really familiar with this idea of industry. And to me, it was just a great thing taking pictures and imagining how it was to work there. Then I also worked as a reparateur, a turner at a machine tool shop. So that was also part of the experience. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. So today we're going to talk about value making in a kind of from a space or from a spatial perspective. So I have one question and one answer in between, or after I've told you the main story, we'll go through some of these aspects. So how does value come about? This is, of course, a very profound question. And this is the question I pose. I won't give a complete answer, but try to give one. That value comes about when we act in various types of arenas. So the outline of the talk is basically the following. I will talk a bit about the problem in the beginning, then move on to look into what are values and how they're made, what we think of it from a sociological point of view. Basically talk about social interaction, social constructivism. The role of space would be the third element. And then I have 3 examples. I'm not sure if I'm going to go through all of them, but at least 2, probably the third one as well, which are then empirical studies, various kinds. So the first one is performance art. It's not uncommon that performance art also take place in various very special places to make the events more interesting for people to visit. So abandoned factory sites are not uncommon, for example. The second empirical case is craft production, or the fairs of craft persons who have produced craft works. And of course, people like us coming there and visiting. And the third one is on marketplaces. And then I will try to conclude a bit. So the problem is, in my view, essentially the following. I mean, the problem of value wouldn't be if there was something that everything that we value, think about, came somehow with a price tag or a tag. It doesn't have to be price in terms of economic tag, but if we could somehow realize by looking at the value of that thing, be it a human being, and then of course it's only not just an economic value that we're talking about, but it can also be products. Or that we could have some kind of ruler and measure the quality or the value of things. But apparently, and obviously, this is not the case. So in many situations, we are uncertain about the values, or we don't know which values there are, or even if we know these values, there are still uncertainties around them. So they are uncertain primarily because values are human-made. I said, if we had that this glass came with some kind of value, this house came with some kind of value, of course, everything has an economic value, but there are many more values to it. I heard from Oliver that there are other people who see this area to be value for other things than research. And then you have conflicts of values, perhaps. But the uncertainty stems essentially for us being part of these values, making them. So in a way, what we think, see, do with a certain stance or kind of viewpoint in relation to something else. And these values can be positive, that we like them, or we can also, and this we rarely speak about, negative values in the sense we dislike things. But the point here is that the value is not inherent in the objects, in anything. So it's man-made. But the point from a sociological point of view is that these values are made in social interaction. So it's when many of us come together, values emerge often in an unintentional way. That is, no one has decided what the values are and how they should be. No one individual has decided. And in this book, Uncertainty, Private Individual Problems, Public Solutions, I address this issue and talking about institutions, for example. Grown institution, informal institution, norms, values, culture, and so on and so forth, are typical example of values of society which provide order for a society. And as we know, it's not just one value, but typically there are societies which have certain values. And these emerge. No one has decided the values of Germany, the UK, Switzerland, Sweden, or any other country. And of course, we also know that within countries, we have varieties of values. But so you cannot decide them. You can decide that you're not not allowed to play some of the values out or to behave to follow some values, but the values themselves are really hard to say you're not allowed to have this value because people can have values. And of course, in the Eastern German part of Germany, in the past, people held values under suppression, and you could suppress the activities, but not necessarily the values. So that's one of the issues I discuss in this book, and it also frames my discussion today. So if we move on to the notion of space, which of course I'm not an expert, many of you I know much more about this. I talk about space coming from a phenomenological background, very kind of Husserlian, Heideggerian background, where space is something that somehow is not there first, but something we discover in the practices. So we turn around the table and start with the experience of it rather than the Cartesian kind of three-dimensional space, as it were. This has ramifications for how you think and how you conceptualize space. I mean, it would be too far. I won't say much more about it. We could get back to that discussion later on. But obviously then the space can be more traditional, like a physical room or marketplace or anything like that, or it can also be virtual. When I use the term arena, I have defined it here, and I'm very open to revisions to this definition. There are organized spaces or places, perhaps better said, organized for certain purposes. So you can have arena for sports, or you can have arena for academic work, an arena for economic exchange, and so on and so forth. So for example, a typical marketplace, Flohmarkt, would be an example of an arena which has then primarily, but not necessarily only, economic interests or focus on economic aspects. And of course, space, as you know, is frequently politicized, and people make decisions for others about space, who has the right to space, and so on and so forth. But I will, in a sense, bracket the notion of space and not go again into detail about what it is. As said, some of you know this better than I do. So I will basically go through these three case studies, you can call them, where the first is on performance art. So this is a paper I do with Edmund Sandström and Henrik Fürst, where we actually analyze performance art and how values come about. I don't know how many of you have been to a performance festival or something like that. And there are various types. I will show you some slides if you haven't been to one, so you get a sense of it at least. And typically, performance is almost like a sect, or we call it a tribe in English. I mean, using the anthropological notion that people who are members of this tribe, and we focus on a special tribe, which is a kind of avant-garde of the avant-garde, so to speak. An extreme case of artists, performance artists, many of whom, or at least some of whom, are also academics and have permanent positions. So it is really a kind of, it is as if we were to build houses or doing political parties. I mean, exaggerating it a bit, but that's a kind of, some of them have these double roles, but of course the field is much larger than so. But the point is that they consider themselves to be the group which has the right to make decisions about what is art and not art, or put better, new art and art. They see themselves as avant-garde and avant-garde. Obviously, it's not clear if everyone else agreed to their own definition, but that's a claim they make. If you have read a bit of Bourdieu, you would recognize this, or Howie Becker, Pierre-Michel Mengier, the kind of the three big sociology of art researchers. You would see there are some similarities in the sense that there are certain groups which are defining the field, if you speak with Bourdieu, more than others, and they claim to be one. And it's always a claim making. It's not an objective kind of necessity that one group does it. So they are in for it for art's sake, so to speak. They are not primarily into it for economic value. So how do they create this new art? And how do you value new art? How come values in here to make sure or to establish new art? But that is the issue. So we ask actually how new art emerged in performance art by focus on this small tribe. And they meet at various festivals around the world where they do performances. And it's very kind of, being present in the space at a certain time. There's nothing like, you cannot tune in online and do performance art. You have to be there with your body, with your body. So it's a very clear, a physical aspect of it. And it's not just the physical that it occurs somewhere. You have to be physically engaged. Your body has to be present as an artist. And obviously and typically they don't record these sessions necessarily. So to be a member of the audience, you also have to be physically present. You cannot just zoom in or see the report about this art performance. You have to be present. And furthermore, it's an oral tradition. And this also goes well with the notion of tribe. The tribe is anthropological, the kind of pre-modern societies in the sense that there were no written language and so on and so forth. It was an oral tradition. So things fade away. So you have to be reenacted. You have to be a member of the tribe to keep this collective memory of what is art and what is not art. And what we show is that in terms of value, that they go into ambiguity. They have to show not in the German language, they Zweideutigkeit, but that's a wrong translation. It's a Mehrdeutigkeit. It's even openness. It's not even given that there are specific given interpretations. The notion ambiguity is that it is interpretive openness. I think this is what they want to achieve. That's a condition almost of being a performance artist, that you actually establish a situation in the room at the time when you are present, when you do your thing, that no one really knows what's going on. And gradually something emerges out of that in interaction somehow with the interpreters, which is not you as an artist primarily, but others. So that's why the notion of ambiguity is key here. And of course, this means that ambiguity, we don't have any preset values. There's no standard. It's openness in terms of what we value as new art. Again, going back to the ruler, if there was a ruler, if there was a way of knowing at home that if I do this, this will be a very good performance art, it wouldn't really be performance. You have to be engaged at the time. You have to make use of the room as it is, when you make it that day. If it's raining, it's raining. You cannot say, well, I can't do my performance because it's raining. Well, you have to enact it in a way that the rain becomes an integral part of what you do, and so on and so forth. So we use Goffman's frame analysis, the book from '74, which is fairly thick and probably his worst book in terms of writing style. I mean, some of you laugh, it means that you have read it, good. And the notion of ambiguity is very present in his book. We draw perhaps a bit more on Gadamer and Heidegger, who actually developed the idea of interpretation at a deeper level, and of course, always in relation to ambiguity. They were clear about that. So we did data collection in several countries some years ago, and we followed it up. It's not part of this slide. We did also some later observations, but it's certainly one person who did much more than the rest of us. When you come to the festival, the guiding person, the organizer, and here it's again, it's someone, we'll get back to it, someone organizes the conference or the festival and sets the terms, perhaps set an agenda for what is important. So that is also something that the artist somehow has to take into account. He or she cannot just sit at home thinking the thing out and go there and do it as if it was nothing occurring at the event itself. Well, there are people there, the weather, what the organizers say, all this has somehow to go into the performance to be deemed as a good performance. So we'll give you some example of performance. As of course, we'll just I won't show you in a graphic or recorded, and because well you can, but I have decided not to do. And the point here is that the artists themselves are not control of the art. So here's the first one, what is called simply legitimate art. So this is just a guy. I mean, it's hard. You have some pose here, and then he just walks around like this for a while, for an hour, for 2 hours, 3 hours, I don't know, for a long time. That's his performance. And I think it's very clear that in this case, it was seen as art. I mean, it was legitimate, partly because it was within the frame of art, the art scene. It was you can see this, it looks very much like a gallery, and it was a gallery. So in a sense, the space was preset. Here we do art. Outside of the gallery, we do something else. It's not so clear that it's art. So in a sense, it reduces the uncertainty for everyone being present, that this was clearly sanctioned art in a way. But it wasn't, I mean, people thought, well, it's okay, but it's not something that really revolutionized performance art. It's still just art. I mean, political non-art, and this is really, I mean, just a symbolic version, because there are a lot of art which is essentially political, and then it's harder and less frequently seen as art in this, according to this group. You have to remember, they want to define art in a certain way. There may be other groups defining it in different ways, but anything that is political is typically not seen as really art if it's overly political. Here's another example of what is called a spectacle, and this is the complete failure. So that's why we have blurred these people. Because we didn't want to put them to show how the failure were. I mean, failure in the sense that the audience and the others didn't like it. These were two from my home country, Sweden. So now you know about much more about them. And this is typically a way you dress up on the 13th of December to celebrate what is called Lucia. It's kind of very dark in Sweden. Then you light up and you walk around and sing. And these two guys, typically there's Lucia, as you can imagine, is a woman, and she sings very beautiful and has a lot of people, other the choir, who also sings very beautifully. In this case, they couldn't sing. They were walking around laughing. And the other thing, they just made a fool of themselves. So one reported in the field from the field notes, basically said, I went back to my hotel to take a nap because I was embarrassed. I was so discouraged to see them. He really hated what they did. And others from other artists, who were there, they also didn't like it. So for these two people, they faced the hardest penalty a tribe member can face, which is essentially death, or, well, of course, they didn't kill them, but they wanted that bad, and they were not. But they were expelled from the group. So they were actually not allowed to revisit other workshops or festivals because they were deemed to be too bad to be artists. So this was really a failure in their eyes of the actors. I mean, there were many, they may have been laughed at, and maybe small children loved to see that, I don't know. But you see, the value here is what those who are in the field value, and they didn't like this. This was clearly seen as a non-art spectacle falling outside, and the worst end of it, so to speak. Here's another case where clearly ambiguity was achieved, but it wasn't seen as art. I mean, the pictures are not so good, but you can see that there is some kind of paper here, like on the floor, and these are bottles, empty glass bottles. And around, and you can see this also looks like a gallery or something like that. It was also a setup in that sense that it was set up in an arena where it was clear this is about art. And people, there were stones there, so people could throw stones at the glass bottles. And then if you hit the bottle and the glass broke, you got applause. So then after a while, it looked more like this. You can imagine how it looks like if all the glasses are crushed by stones. And then this artist, start to jump the way forward. Of course, what happened is that their feet, well, you can imagine. Here you see also what happened. She started to bleed, and it was quite a lot. So people in the room and the field notices, you could feel the smell of blood in the room. You see, you get a bit disgusted. And I mean, and for a while, of course, it was like, is this going to be great art? Because people in performance, they shot themselves and done, I mean, not to death, but through the arms. And they have done things of a similar kind. So it's not completely uncommon that things like this occur. But at the end of this, her jumping, she fell, and they had to call an ambulance and send her to the hospital. And some of the organizers had to come with her to the hospital. So that was the end of that performance. And though people somehow thought it was strong in one sense, but it was weak in the other, because it threatened the very nature of the festival, because this meant that all the focus was taken. She got in the focus, and everyone cared about her, had to break it up, stop it, and send her to the hospital, and so on and so forth. So she disrupted and didn't give the others a chance. So this was not seen, although some thought that, well, there were some good elements there, but it was not well executed. Maybe should have planned it better, shouldn't have less bottles and so on. But it's kind of, how many bottles can you have? And it's not that easy, I guess, to plan it that way. So to sum that up, you really have, it's not just that you have a certain space and you do something and then you're fine. It's much more complicated, because again, if it was that easy, all of us could do it. Any one of us could do it. The point is that is it still on? Yeah, good. The body of the artist has to be there, as I mentioned. And then one has to show presence. It's not just standing. One has to be actively engaged in one way or the other. And this is free how to enter. And you have to create some kind of ambiguity, in the sense that people typically do not clearly get it or understand exactly what it's about. This is something that has to be interpreted. And typically it's interpreted during the performance, but also after. Online by commenting, they meet at dinners, parties, and discuss it. So in this sense, this oral tradition means that some things are seen as new art and those being valued as new art. That's really what's being valued. So this is an outcome which no one really plans, and eventually some of these performances are remembered by members of the tribe as being new art. So though in those rare events, you have managed to push the border of art. By this collective interpretation. There's one example we write about in the paper. This paper is not published, it's in the review process. There was a guy who had a history in the field, so he was again established. I think all of them are established in the sense they're invited, and so on and so forth. And he opened his hoodie and closed it by, there was a flagpole, and he closed it so he was kind of sitting next to the flagpole and was standing for a couple of hours. And there was I think it was a Swedish flag waving in the wind there. And this was seen as a really strong statement by his. So, I mean, you may laugh or think it's stupid, but that's not the point, what we think. That's what they think, because they are the insider. As when we consider something to be good research, and it may not be shared by everyone, but we think we have the right to say so, or the right persons do it. So, in a sense, all of this shows really nicely, I think, that we outsiders don't get what is new art. It's barely that they themselves know it. When they see it, they have to kind of interpret it collectively, and eventually there's something called new art emerging. Meaning that, again, we're very far from this, the ruler, the tags on things. It's just something that occurs in interaction between people. And in this case, you have to have a certain kind of position in the field to interpret, but also the other conditions. It has to occur. The conditions of the performance is space. that has to be interpreted then by not only by the artist but other audiences. So the second case is value making at fairs. And this is a paper I do with Judith Neufeld, who works with me in St. Gallen. And it's her fieldwork. I've done something on fairs, but not systematic and not the kind of fair she does. So we look at value making at fairs. And of course, these are typically different kinds of fairs. You have the bazaar in Istanbul, which maybe, and there are many classic bazaars, which are marketplaces, perhaps more than fairs. You have the Greek agora, which was a bit of everything. And gradually you have craft fairs, which we study, and you have trade fairs, also industrial trade fairs for military gears, for example. So you can imagine, instead of going to look at these things that she has done, you can go and look at guns, and the logic is the same. You have a military fair or for a military aircraft or whatever you have it. So there are fairs of all kinds. And I think what we see is more specializations. The Greek agora was the public one. Everything was open. It was not just a marketplace, but it was also the political arena, whereas the military fair is probably very restricted. It's not for everyone to enter, and we have everything in between. So we zoom in on handicraft fairs. That is things that have done according to the handicraft logic. Basically, it means that there are small-scale producers, and this is in Switzerland, so they have to make not everything. I mean, if you do a leather rucksack, for example, you don't have to do everything yourself. You don't have to take care of the animal, but you can buy the leather and then make it from there. But it's also not the case that you can just order it and claim yourself to be a handicraft artist. So in this field, again, there's some kind of limitations and conditions to be an insider. So we in this paper related to the social evaluation and also to the marketing literature or in business studies. How is the value of craft objects made at first? So we zoom in really what's happening again in the physical place where in this case, buyers and sellers. In the last case, it was onlookers and those who claim to be artists. And I mean, what I didn't mention, the fact that we had two cases in galleries, and we had two cases outside when they were enacting art, so to speak, in the city outside of galleries. What our answer is really a relational approach in which narrations are used to create the value of the objects. And I will go through that, what I mean by that. So the fair is, I mean, I think during the corona, they had some attempts to make them online, but the very point of fair is that you go there to physical place and pay some entrance fees if you're a visitor. So in a way, you have to decide to go in there. It's typically not free entrance. And usually you have a lot of other activities going on at the same time. So we pick up some ideas at first that the objects are tangible, they are present, and put on display. And it means also that given the fact that you're presenting something at a handicraft fair, or if you attend one as a visitor, you know that the goods are certified, so to speak. They have been checked to be handicraft goods, as it were. So it's not just the product themselves, but the social interaction that matters. I mean, these are just some ideas that others have found. And they add values and so on. So we can leave that basically. The theory we zoom in is is the theory of singularity, that people, consumers, increasingly want goods which are singulars, that are unique in the sense that they make them stand out from the crowd or make a distinction in relation to a possibility. This builds on the works of Lucien Cappic, which Requist take up and makes like a social theory of. So this is preferred by the consumers. And we claim that the value is somehow built into, imbued into the objects by the co-presence of the buyer and the seller. And I will talk more about that. So we have some data collection. Again, this is typically Judith's ethnographic work that she did during some years. And you see it covered also the Corona years. So she went to these fairs talking to people and also did interviews afterwards. She also visited their I mean, usually they have kind of a shop where they do produce the things. So here, the first thing is that these fairs are organized. The fair is an organized arena for value making. And of course, they wouldn't claim this. You would never see that it says a fair is an organized arena for value making. That's obviously our conceptualization of it. So this is like a quotation from one person there. So that they select on both sides, actually, those being selected to present, exhibit, and those being selected to come in. Because sometimes they charge them fairly high sums. I mean, not huge sums, but let's say in Switzerland it would be up to like 20 euros for entrance, perhaps in other countries a bit lower, but I mean, that would be, I mean, 10, 15. So it's still not something as it costs you a couple of coffees to enter. So you might do different things than just go in there. So somehow you make some kind of commitment also as a buyer or potential buyer to go there. And you can get a drink and things like that. So the co-presence is really, really important there. And this physical presence is the condition of the narration to make it singular. Because otherwise you can just attach a story to the good, and then you have different stories of the good. But the point here is that the craft person and the potential buyer come together, and they talk to one another, and they can go back and forth, and gradually something is built up, a relation there, which is an important element of the value making of these goods. Meaning that the good in the eye of the potential buyer, or even the buyer when the good is purchased, the good has a specific meaning to this person, which is somehow given in the narration by the producer. So they have a sense that they know something about the producer, they know something about the goods, where the material is sourced, and so on and so forth. And this is a unique time and point in a special situation that this narration is created. It's not something done over phone or online, it's just here and now, so to speak, that is being done. So both of them are engaged, invest energy, emotion, time, and financial means in order to make this happen. So they devote themselves to this interaction. So if someone buys something at the fair, the now value imbued good is taken home. So it leaves, so to speak, its production site, its trading site, and ends up with the buyer. So here's one way of trying to schematically see the process. The conditions of the fair are the presence of the maker, exhibition of objects, selection of participants, sales opportunity. That's really the condition, what the site, the physical arena allows and in a way primes all the goods being there. Interaction, you communicate with the buyer or vice versa, the seller. And they're physically co-present. So they, in a way, devote time to be there at the same time. And there's a context. And out of this, relations, value making by narration, stories are told, and relations between the buyer and the seller and the objects are made, and the objects gain value in this process. This unique singular value is imbued, the objects are imbued with that, so to speak. And it's important here to recognize it's not the same thing as if someone, a famous soccer player, for example, writes his or her name on a football, making it unique in the sense that it's only this ball that is, or you sell a piece of art, it's only one. The thing here is that the goods themselves are essentially the same. You take one, there may be a small difference. You may have done them in a slightly different way, but essentially it is, and you may even argue that it's of less quality than you buy in a store, because the variation of quality is certainly there if it's handmade. So it must not necessarily be that you buy something that is inherently qualitatively or functionally better, but you buy something which is equal, you can say, but it's added to this product, you add something, a value, which is not, so to speak, inherent in the object. So this is another way of illustrating it. In the left-hand side, primary market here is really at the fair where the transaction occurs. Buyer and seller meet, they talk about it as I talked before. The buyer buys the object. The middle picture here intends to show that the buyer has this unique object. The value is still, so to speak, with the object and the buyer, because he or she knows how this product was produced, how it has been imbued with value, and in her eyes or his eyes. So that is still there, so to speak, the added value to its functionality. If this person decides to give it to someone and this person takes it to a second-hand market, none of this remains. Everything is kind of erased. So then you only have these gray things like the object in its functionality, its used functionality then is sold for the price of its functional value, because none of this imbued value remains with the object. In contrast to a piece of art, which may have signed by someone, but craft persons are typically not artists in the sense that they don't have brand names. They are not known as individuals in the same way as artists might be. So there's still, over time, you see this transition of value, which has nothing to do with the product. It's just the consequences of the social setting, where the social setting space is essential for formatting this first value. And when this is gone, but also then when the second component is gone, the relational structure between the buyer and the object is gone, so to speak. The narration fades away. Then it's not much left. So this is a kind of a negative analysis of value making. It goes in both directions, but you see it's not inherent in the objects, as I said. But it also takes us further because it makes us understand to what extent marketing add things. And this is a marketing which we call a kind of devotion. It's not just a marketing, typically you sell more products. But here the point is that if you're a producer, you cannot sell enormous amount of goods because you have only 24 hours a day, and you have to be present there yourself. You have to make them yourself. So there's a limitation to what you can produce. So that's part of the narration, the conditions of the narration, so to speak. Whereas a narration of a brand, McDonald's or what have you, Porsche car or whatever, is of course applies to all the objects. So even if you say sell 100,000 or 10 million, it really doesn't change the narration. If you buy into that, there is something to it, so to speak. But here it's limited in terms of how many goods that can be narrated, as it were, in this sense, gain some kind of value. So what we say is that craft products gain value when the craft person is co-present, and this becomes a singular object. So we have a combination of factors like the place, time, engagement by both parties, and narration and a memory that really creates this value. Of course, this means that the value creation becomes somewhat complicated, but I do think that it's a one way of understanding the profoundness of social, but also the profoundness of space, which are, so to speak, enabling or conditioning this. Because without these spaces, or as I call them here, arenas, it would be really hard to establish this collective value which all craft products are. If they are just, so to speak, just in their shops here and there, you wouldn't really know what criteria, but you see, you bring them together in one place and say, everyone here is a producer of craft products. So everyone knows this, and it's a physical one. You could imagine the situation online where this association is, but it's less tangible. And here, the physical presence that you actually have at the fair makes it possible to sell things in a unique way, in a singular way. So it cannot obviously then be translated to the secondary market. I do a fairly quick one, the third, and then round it off. I think that makes time-wise also a bit sense to have three as intended. So physical marketplaces, and here we are more clearly in the realm of the economy, because the fair has many values. The marketplace has also many values, but it's more distinctly oriented towards selling and buying. And these are, I think the one in the middle there, the Agora is an artificially intelligence created picture. The others are of various markets, in Antwerp and on Bus Paris and so on and so forth, if I remember correctly. So there are different marketplaces, physical and online. And of course, here we have really marketplaces. We can skip some markets, platform and fair, and go directly to the end of the bottom. Marketplace is a partially organized place for trade, physical and digital. So again, we have an arena that's being organized to make sure that trade occurs there and not elsewhere. In the past, of course, it was within the castle for the king or the prince to make sure that taxes could be extracted and you were not allowed to trade outside of the castle. But on the other hand, it was also the safe haven because no one dared to rob you within the realms of the castle. And of course, then you had to pay tax when it came in and when it came out. So it was an easy way of centralizing trade. And the marketplaces have only fairly recently become obviously digital, even though some stock exchanges in the 70s had tendencies of online or, well, various types of online trade. And I remember when I was a small child, and my grandfather took me to the stock exchange in Stockholm, in the old town, where the same house actually at this Swedish academy, who gives out the Nobel Prize in literature, have their offices and meeting rooms. So in the basement there was this stock exchange, and people were sitting at the desks, but it was complete silence because they were still communicating only via the computers. And this was must have been like 82 or something like that, I guess. So physically they were present, but all trade were electronically mastered. But today, of course, you can sit anywhere and trade on a marketplace. But you still have the marketplace as a creation. It's an organized place for trade. And organization essentially just means decision for others. So you can imagine that what we talked about before, organizing places is an essential element for value making. Well, the history marketplace, I think we can just skip it. Interesting enough, we still have, in many places where you think, New York Stock Exchange, you still have floor trading. The percentage of the value traded on the floor is very, very limited. But still, it's ongoing. So the seats, the price you pay for a seat, the physical seat that is at the trading floor has gone down. So now it doesn't cost you very much if you want to start trading. And of course, there are many marketplaces, bazaars are like tourist attractions these days, because it's just a place where you see so many things. At the same time as there actually are real life places for a colleague of mine, Matthias Dewey. He has studied La Salade in Buenos Aires, studying fashion trade there. And it's just a very fascinating study, which is, of course, again, a physical place where people come and trade and produce and sell and do all things with garments. So here, if you start to go into an analysis of what the marketplace is, it's typically decision for others. You can decide on membership, that is, who is allowed into the marketplace, to the physical space. The rules of the trade, you set terms for deciding what can be done and what obviously cannot be done at the marketplace. We saw that if you just go back to the art field, it was the idea is to not have so many rules, but still there are ways you can go beyond what is accepted. There was no punishment for the woman whose feet were bleeding, but there was a punishment for the ones who were really bad making art, these two with blurred face or black dots over their faces. So these are consequences again of decisions, but there were no rules saying that you're not allowed to go around like this in this French city, where of course they had no clue what these two guys were doing. But it was just a decision. But here, typically marketplaces, they have lists of rules, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, and positive and negative sanctions. And of course, you have a way of controlling, monitoring that the people trading follow the rules. Of course, this theoretical scheme you can apply also to the fairs. But I think for marketplaces, which we have studied in particular, this is more clear, the case. And this builds on the paper I did with Jörn Arne and Aspers in organization studies some years ago. But we have developed it, and now we're doing a handbook on marketplaces. And of course, they're sanctioned in a hierarchy as in all kinds of organizational units. But it's partially organized. So the thing is that the marketplace is not, so to speak, within the realm of one single organization. You can go to a marketplace, you bring your goods, which you own, and you bring your goods, which you still own when you go home. So it's not like you play market or marketplace within the realm of one single organization. The single organization provides typically a space for others to trade. That was, and there are various ways to organize it, which we can go into detail. But I will try to get closer to wrapping it up. So again, you put things on display, and value here, and typically here the economic value comes as a negotiation thing. Buying and selling, talking, higgling and bargaining. Interesting, today when we have more and more online marketplaces, a lot of this back and forth becomes more difficult. Another thing that somehow seems to be disappearing is the gossip that the physical place, people coming together, meeting, talking, somehow it disappears. Where do you talk about tips, ideas, things like that, and the social thing? It just somehow is cut out if you do it online. Interesting enough, a colleague of mine, Asaf Dar, he studies. He's done a lot of studies on marketplaces, and we have written things together. He's in Haifa, so I mean, I was online with him yesterday, and I mean, you can imagine how the situation is for him. But anyhow, I mean, I can't stop the war. I can talk to him as a colleague, and this we talked about him writing a paper on gift giving in marketplaces. But another study is really this idea that they are setting up communities, online communities, to handle the notion of gossip if they trade online on a marketplace. So the marketplace itself does not provide this meta structure. So they created themselves to learn from one another. The things that you would normally do at the marketplace, a physical marketplace, if you would go there. So this digital infrastructure has to be rebuilt by the actors themselves somehow, because apparently you cannot trade without the meta communication, knowledge about trading. And this probably goes for all types of marketplace. You know, a lot of people are into crypto, especially young right-wing people. And of course, they just don't trade, but it's also about talking about how to trade. They also have to learn how to trade these things because they're highly complicated. For many people, they're probably too complicated. But, you know, history is full of stories where people invest in things and then they lose the money. So that's not uncommon. So I will wrap up with two slides. I think what I stressed for today is, because I'm not an expert on space or arenas per se, but I've given some examples, and what I try to show is that these are typically organized. I'm sure they're also non-organized, but from my knowledge, it's I mean, especially when you look into the economic side, it's tend to be always some kind of level of organization. It's not completely organized, not like one organization within that, but it's openness to others, but someone organized, that is, make decision for others. But you cannot, on the other hand, make decision about the value, neither in markets nor in any other situation. I mean, obviously in kind of societies where there is one decision maker, he or she, the king in the past or the queen, could make a lot of decisions what was good and bad and decide what is right and wrong and so on and so forth. But mostly values emerge out of interaction, that it's not something we decide. We can decide on formal institution, but we cannot decide on informal institution. And on that side, I would set values. So this is like, I mean, we can discuss this, of course. The publicness, of course, it goes well with the notion of an arena, that it's the public. It's not just for one. And I bracket this individualized notion of value, which is kind of the classic Personian, where I have my values and you have your values. I would use other terms for that. I have my preferences, my wishes, my wants, whatever. That's mine. I want this glass more than you. Let's have a fight of it. But the value of water, we can probably agree upon. And there are a lot of examples that one can relate to. So they are organized in a way that enables value making. It doesn't organize the value making itself. This is another way of saying what I said before. So we need to combine the analysis of, on the one hand side, perhaps decision making, organizational theory, and process of mutual adjustment. And mutual adjustment is, well, these are two, in my view, ordering principles: decision for others and mutual adjustment. And we need to combine them here. And of course, well, to what extent does this apply to your cases? That would be, to me, very interesting to hear if this resonates, what I've said, to what you're doing, your expertise, your fields, your studies. Other things I could imagine us discussing, but these are just my suggestions. I would very much more like to hear your comments, questions, discussion points than me raising more. Well, the phenomenology of space or arenas, what does it mean? To what extent, how should we understand the physicality of it, so to speak, or the spatiality? And of course, the classic issue, economic values versus non-economic values. But I think with that, I close this presentation and look very much forward to your comments. So thanks for staying alive, so to speak.